Hi, I'm David Brown, and I'm a employment and human rights lawyer in Kelowna, British Columbia. Today I'm here with two of my colleagues, Simon Kent and Kim Darling, and we're going to be talking about off-duty conduct. So this happens from time to time where we get a call either from an employee or from an employer where something happened on the weekend and now they're getting called in on Monday morning to deal with HR. So let's deal with a scenario here where maybe something like this came up. Somebody goes out on a Saturday night, they have too many drinks maybe. Maybe they get into a bar fight and and spend the night in the drunk tank.
Okay.
You get a call from the employer on Monday morning. How do you deal with this?
What's the employer asking? Whether they can let this person go?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I ask a lot of questions. That's the first thing I do. I try to figure out, well, what effect is this really having on the business? Is this just a case of the employer not liking the behavior of one of their employees and wanting to, in a way, punish them or not have them part of the organization? Or is this a situation where the person has actually done something which is going to make the employer look bad?
Right.
And so if, for instance, this individual was working for, an anti-drinking and driving community service group and was found to have engaged in sort of a alcohol-induced brawl in downtown Kelowna, well, I can see there's a connection between the two, and
Right.
it can have the employer's business not look very good. And so I would be, in that situation, more open to the idea of saying to the employer, you can let this person go for cause, which means no severance is payable. What do you think, Kim? Oh.
Well, I was just going to touch
Yeah.
on that actually, because it's one thing where you're given the example of a nonprofit that deals with drinking and driving and having something like this in the community.
Yeah.
But what happens, Kim, if you're dealing with somebody whose behavior has nothing to do with their employment? Take, for example, like a warehouse worker or something like that. They're not public facing. Does that still matter as much?
Well, I think it goes back to the definition of what is cause, which is conduct incompatible with continued employment. And if your conduct is such that it's not reasonable for you to continue in your employment, then there's cause for dismissal. I think this is a really tough set of facts, because if you have someone who's not public facing, not the face of your organization, and they do something in their private time that's maybe showing poor judgment, I'm not sure that there is cause to terminate them.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't want to get rid of them on paying them reasonable notice, but I'm not sure that you have cause.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that as well. I mean, really, from my perspective, it really comes down to the reputation of the organization and how was that reputation impacted by the off-duty conduct. If it doesn't take place in the workplace itself and it's not impacting day-to-day business operations, that's really the only way that I can see this as being material to trying to terminate somebody for cause.
Well, what happens if the brawl was with another employee from the organization?
Yeah, I think that becomes a very different type of scenario, because obviously people are going to be carrying that back into the workplace, and that's going to need to be dealt with certainly.
Mm-hmm. I've had a situation before where two coworkers were engaged in some assault behavior, and there was a peace bond issued where they could not both be in the workplace together, or at least they had to be at least, I think it was like 100 meters away from each other in the workplace, but it was a small workplace, so it was impossible for this to happen. So do you know what happened?
I don't know.
I'll tell you. The employer fired both of them, which I thought was interesting. And
Well, you couldn't prefer one over the other. How would you pick?
because you could pick if one person committed the assault and the peace bond was against that person. So you would say, well, that's the person who made
Yeah.
the mistake, and therefore they're the one who should
But
be
that's
fired.
not what you said. You said they had it against each other.
Right.
They were in a fight with each other, and they had mutual
Yes.
peace bonds, right?
They were both
So,
participants in this.
yeah, you can't
Yeah.
you can't prefer one over the other. I don't care seniority or anything like that. If they've both participated in the event and have both done wrong to the point where they either have restraining orders or peace bonds, then you can't prefer one over the
Why
other.
not? Well, what's the negative ramifications to the employer preferring one over the other? I'm going to keep Sandy because he's our top producer, even though he's the one who's in the wrong and threw the punch or won the fight or was the most aggressive. But I'm going. What's the downside to the employer in doing that?
Well, I think if they've reached the point where they've both been assessed criminally responsible, which is the basis for the peace bond or the restraining order, then I don't think that the employer should put themselves in the position of being the adjudicator of who was the worst wrongdoer.
We're using kind of an extreme example here where we're talking about people getting into a fight like after hours, but we see it all the time where there's disputes in the workplace, out of the workplace, and where companies play favorites, right? Where they
Yes.
say, you know what, I'm going to support my manager, or I'm going to support this person because they are a hard producer. And I don't think that there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, but it certainly does create for difficult HR dynamics.
It does.
Thanks for sharing your perspectives on that. That was a really great conversation. I'm David Brown, here today with Simon Kent and Kim Darling in our Kelowna office with Kent & Fletcher.